What's up, guys? It's time for me to add another recurring video series to my already bogged up Rolodex of recurring video series, which brings us to one that I'm calling It Came From a B Movie, a series which is going to look at the various remakes of 50s and 60s B science fiction or horror movies. The 50s and 60s B movies are memorable for just being completely cheesy in concept, but being played completely straight in execution. This is an era of science fiction when, at the time, our knowledge of certain fields of science were very limited, but at the same time we were making some pretty big advances in other scientific fields. And they're notable in that when filmmakers got a hold of them years later, the cheesy aspects were dropped completely, the subject matter was modernized, and in some cases they just changed the plot entirely. And as a result, the movies became much better. That is, of course, unless they didn't. And because I'm a glutton for punishment, we're gonna start this off not by looking at one of the all-time greats in this genre, but by looking at John Carpenter's Village of the Damned. John Carpenter's Village of the Damned is based on the novel The Midwich Cuckoos by author John Wyndham, as well as the original adaptation of that book, also titled Village of the Damned. It's your average creepy children with powers story. A little bit of background. Basically, Lawrence Bachman, who was head of MGM when the original came out, saw the success of the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Realizing that a corny 50s-60s sci-fi movie could be remade in the modern day with better special effects and less regulation of risque subject matter, Bachman thought a remake of Village of the Damned could be a major hit, as the original novel mentioned such taboos as abortion and impregnation, things that couldn't be brought up directly in the original movie because of the time period. The project floated around for a while, and in fact, you could say it floated around a little too long because it completely missed the peak period of those 50s B remakes in the 80s, but eventually it landed at Universal and the project was given to John Carpenter. John Carpenter is one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, but in a weird way because out of all my favorite filmmakers, he has probably the most amount of movies that I don't actually like. It's weird how that works. Many things from the 80s did not fare well in the 90s. The Brat Pack, slasher movies, hair metal, and John Carpenter. While he has his share of box office successes, or at least making more than he spent on the movie, many of his films did not make much money and would end up getting a cult following later. His greatest movie of all time, The Thing, barely broke even, and it was just reamed by critics for no good reason. It was only later on that the movie became recognized as one of the best sci-fi horror films of all time. By the time the 80s ended and the 90s started, I think studios were beginning to run out of patience with John Carpenter. He was pretty much doing a movie every year in the 80s and only a few of them were making any kind of money. This isn't factoring in rentals or home media. And the 90s started out with a comedy which I've heard people seem to enjoy but didn't do well, with Memoirs of an Invisible Man, followed by In the Mouth of Madness, which again, I've heard people enjoy it, didn't do very well. And finally, Village of the Damned landed on his lap. One aspect of this project that made it so attractive to John Carpenter was that he was able to shoot it in his hometown. John Carpenter reminds me of myself in that he's a lazy fucking bum who doesn't want to do anything.
Out this hand, Jason. I'm about to bust. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was the bathroom. Oh, good lord!
Carpenter was also a fan of the original movie, stating that he had a crush on one of the girls when he was a kid, saying he wanted her to, and I quote, "I wanted her to zap me and take me over and make me do whatever she wanted." Good God. Carpenter rewrote some of David Himmelstein's script in order to humanize it a bit, which I guess meant making David more of a rogue element within the Cuckoos and giving more emotional content to the rest of the characters. The new rewrites attempted to help bring a 60s B movie into the 90s, where a film needed more substance. The cast in this would be very high-end in the 80s, but this is the 1990s, and besides Christopher Reeve, the cast was, well, I guess you could say they were still names, but they were pretty low rent. Kirstie Alley, the chick from Crocodile Dundee, Michael Parr, Mark Hamill. If this movie came out today, it would be straight to streaming. Right away, you can see the movie's very nicely shot. Carpenter knows how to get the most aesthetically pleasing shots possible, so even his worst movies still have decent camera use. It all starts during the Midwich County Fair, I guess you can call it, when all of a sudden everybody just conks out as a strange shadow passes over the town. And this thing puts you the fuck out, like when Jill's husband, played by Michael Parr, is driving and crosses into the town's limits while this is all happening, he just knocks out and then for some reason he explodes. explodes. And another dude drops on a barbecue, and believe me, it's gonna be hilarious in a few hours. We quickly learn that those who enter the town of Midwich just kinda drop, but are fine as soon as they get dragged out of the radius. You know, unless they fucking explode. And yes, that's Kirstie Alley, when she could still get work. The original movie took place in the UK. This one takes place in the US, so while the military are involved in the plot, the approaches are different due to both the difference in time period as well as in location. Post-Cold War era movies that involve the government are always weird because they can no longer blame the Russians for everything, so instead they blame like chemicals or radiation or whatever. A few hours later, everyone wakes up, and you know, you can bet your sweet stars that this lady will not be eating barbecued pork for a very long time. Dr. Chaffee, played by Christopher Reeve, slowly learns after the incident that 10 women are pregnant inexplicably, including a woman whose husband was abroad in Japan for work over the past year, as well as a teenage girl who is still a virgin. He also learns that his wife is pregnant. This aspect of the build-up is rather interesting. Like, what the fuck do you do in this situation? Like, the one woman's husband walks out believing she cheated on him, and yeah, maybe he's a dick, but it's totally justified given the fact that nobody would buy that some horrid eldritch abomination just floated over the town and nutted in all the women. There's a whole aspect around whether the women will abort the babies or keep them, but due to what I can only imagine is psychic intervention in the dreams of the pregnant women from the fetuses, they all decide to keep them. Okay, the fucking town meeting has this part that just fucking kills me. It's like, you know, it's one guy, his wife's pregnant, his daughter's pregnant, and Kirstie Alley is going on about how whoever keeps their baby gets like a $3,000 a month bonus, and this dude's first fucking question:
is that $3,000 a family? What if your wife and your daughter both have kids?
Then you would receive $6,000.
Like, he looks so fucking happy with the $6,000, which, like, in the 90s, you know, that's a lot of fucking money to get a month. Like, but this whole sequence is just, it's pretty funny. So, you know, the births go pretty much fine, as to be expected. The one chick's husband has a change of heart and comes back. The virgin chick has a stillborn. And then Kirstie Alley quickly conceals the dead fetus and takes it to her car, possibly for a midnight snack, because this was, like, just right before she gained all that weight. So at first, everything's all happy, you know, besides the miscarriage and the fact that Crocodile Dundee woman lost her husband during the blackout and now has to raise a child on her own. It's all fun and happy until Chaffee's kid, named Mara, is given food that's just a little too hot and decides to enact swift and brutal revenge on her mother by using her psychic powers to make her dunk her hand in boiling soup. I know this is supposed to be horrifying, but it kinda is, but I couldn't help but laugh when, like, Crocodile Dundee woman comes in and pulls her arm out, only for her to go, like, right back to it. Like, out of context, this scene is actually really funny. After what feels like a really slow, droning build-up, we finally get something when Barbara, who is now traumatized from her kid brain-fucking her into dunking her hand into boiling soup, decides to just take a dive off Stephen King's cliff. I think she was being mind-controlled by Mara, but who knows, maybe she just kinda did it. And we get a time skip, because I love fucking time skips, and I'm guessing the kids have grown to be like 10, 12-year-olds by this point. They all walk in a weird Madeline-like formation and wear really strange dated clothes. It is said that they age faster than normal humans, so this could literally just be a few months after or like a year after. I don't know, I wasn't paying attention. But we already know the kids ain't right. There have been several suicides around the village during the time skip, and many people have vacated it as a result. Also worth noting that all the kids are paired up, besides David, whose intended mate died in childbirth. This allows David to develop more empathy for humans and form a connection with his mother, Crocodile Dundee woman. From here, the movie just kind of drifts through the motions. The kids cause problems, such as making a doctor pour acid in her eyes till she's blind after accidentally putting a corrosive substance in one of the girl's eyes, making Buck Flower jump off a building with his broom pointing at him as punishment for hitting one of the kids with his broom, etc. Mara is clearly the alpha of the pack, and much like the other kids, she's cold and distant towards her father, but she has sort of a sadistic tone to her voice. It's as if she knows her cold attitude is disturbing to her father, and she gets some sort of fucking sick enjoyment out of being superior to him in this regard.
You'll bring us supplies. You can't stop us, you know. Don't try.
David, on the other hand, wanders into a graveyard to find the burial site for his intended mate, where he sees Dr. Chaffee, and manages to connect with him over the loss of his wife. Oh, and the virgin who had the miscarriage is gonna blow her brains out. An interesting aspect that they mention but don't play off of is that these children are not the first or only children of these kind to be born on Earth. Apparently in Australia, 30 women got impregnated but all had miscarriages. In the Arctic, some Inuits became impregnated as well, and in Russia it also happened. This plays on an aspect from the original movie, and it's sequel where it happened internationally. In fact, the sequel has cuckoos from various regions involved. Eventually, the children decide to move to a barn out in the middle of nowhere, and really the movie just kind of drones on from here. Like, another car explodes, the minister played by Mark Hamill tries to snipe Mara, but gets caught and ends up eating a bullet himself, and then the kids tell Dr. Chaffee that he's gonna help them escape out of town. They make Kirstie Alley cut herself open after showing David the stillborn Muppet baby, and Jesus Christ, John, you couldn't get somebody to do a better job on that. Like, you had fucking Rob Bottin on The Thing. You could have gotten literally anybody. Like, this looks terrible. This is fucking awful. It would have taken like an afternoon to make something better. And finally, after endless build-up after build-up, we get the kids going on a rampage, and quite frankly, it really doesn't do all it could do. Like, you know, maybe if we didn't have two literal build-ups, we would have gotten a better climax. Like, we have the minister's wife, for example, leads a mob, and then she gets lit on fire while being mind-controlled, and it's like, you know, she doesn't even, like, run around screaming or anything, so she just stands there, and then the crowd disperses. Like, this should have been a fucking massacre, but nah, it's just kind of lame. When the police and the military show up, it's a little bit more entertaining. You know, there's just some shooting, and a helicopter goes down, but let's get back to the people. Like, it should have just broken down to, like, riot conditions. People should have just started attacking each other. It should have looked like an apocalypse, but either way, after the military and the police, like, literally shoot the shit out of each other, Dr. Chaffee decides to suicide bomb the kids, having discovered a way to block the children from reading his thoughts. And of course, at the pleas of Crocodile Dundee Woman, he tries to get David to leave, but then there's this standoff. Eventually, David and Jill leave without issue, and the children manage to break down his literal mental wall, but it's too late and they all explode. What is with this movie and the explosions? And then Jill and David drive off into the night from the abandoned town to start over, and we get a sequel hook. Yeah, this movie didn't get a sequel because it didn't do very well critically or commercially. It seems like it could have potentially been a remake of The Highest Level, just kind of falls flat. The build-up takes way too long to get going, and when it does, it's over so fast that it really doesn't matter. It's a movie that many consider to be the last decent movie by John Carpenter, and I think it's only passable by virtue of the fact that Escape from LA and Vampires came out afterwards. It seems like the kind of source material that worked in the 60s because it was the 60s, but due to the lack of effort in bringing it up to speed for the 90s, it fell completely flat. Sure, when it goes hard, it goes hard. I love the scene with the military, but it needed to be more than it was in execution. However, there are positives to this. I like what they did with the David character, and Christopher Reeve is a great lead, which is sad because this would be his last leading theatrical role before his accident just weeks after this movie was released. He's sympathetic. You'd think he would be the most outspoken about the kids, but despite being depressed following his wife's forced suicide, he does try his best to raise his new daughter, and when he sees that David has developed some humanity, he becomes determined to try and teach the rest of the cuckoos. Of course, when this fails, he decides to sacrifice himself to destroy them, so it's kind of a mixed message. I guess it's like, believe in something until it blows up in your face because you were wrong, I don't know. And the lead girl of the cuckoos, Mara, is also good. She's the alpha of the pack, and this kid plays fucking creepy little girl so well. Like, the part where she mocks how a human child would act is especially unsettling.
You are a prisoner of your values, and you won't be able to deceive us. You know that, don't you? Father?
The fact that she's a being that doesn't feel emotions, but is smart enough and aware of humanity enough that she can mimic these emotions is pretty fucking creepy. Good on the kid and good on the writer or director, I guess. Like, David's good too, but the rest of the cuckoos really are relegated to mere background parts. I think the movie could have benefited from giving the other kids more in the way of a personality or screen time. And yeah, I get it. The kids aren't supposed to, you know, really have character. They're supposed to be cold and devoid of emotion, but that doesn't mean you can't make the other kids interesting. Another positive is it's a very good looking movie. The effects are good, the scenery's good, John Carpenter has a good eye, what can I say? The movie itself is just very okay, which is sad because this is the last time John Carpenter made a movie that wasn't outright terrible, and all I have to say about it is it's okay. And it's sad because this was Christopher Reeve's last leading role, and all I have to say about it is that it was just okay. Suffice to say, the movie didn't do well. It only made $9.4 million of its $22 million budget back. Its reviews weren't much much better. It holds a 5.6 on IMDb and a 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. Like, it's not a bad movie, it's not a good movie, it just wasn't what it needed to be, and as a result, it's pretty much unmemorable. John Carpenter himself said that he had no real passion for the movie, it was just a studio job for him, which is really sad. I'm guessing this was kind of the start of him being jaded towards Hollywood. Oh well. Personally, I think the concept could be revisited. It has been revisited on British television as recently as this past summer to mixed reviews. But honestly, take some of the liberties this took on the material and take it even farther. Perhaps more introspection into the alien race that the children were born from. So that was my first ever It Came From a B movie, and there are going to be plenty more. Well, probably like 6 or 7 spread over like a year or two. So stay tuned and keep watching the skies.